instead of writing out the whole question, you could put Q1 in a keyword like where is your high school located? So your keyword could be high school for Q1, and then A1 is your answer. Q2, color, and then your answer, and so on. So once you've confirmed your answers, you click next. And then you're going to start setting up your profile. So you're just going to tell the system a little bit about yourself. Filling out the mandatory fields. I guess the point on this screen is you have a choice with the exclamation points of a telephone number. It's either the commercial telephone or the international telephone. Of course, most people choose commercial telephone, but the exclamation point next to that field means you have a choice. It is mandatory, but you choose which telephone number you're going to provide. Once you have that in, you click next. And if you forget to fill out a field, it won't let you advance, and you'll get an error message in red towards the top of which fields you need to provide. So if you don't fill it out correctly, it will not let you advance to the next screen. Supervisor information is for government users. So if you're a small business, you can skip that and come down to the company information and provide all your company information. Okay. I've also highlighted save registration at the bottom of the screen. So if you cannot provide all of the information in one sitting, you can save your registration. And it might also be a good idea just to save it so that you don't have to start all over again, but it'll give you a choice. You can save and continue or save and exit and come back later. And as I said, this is what you'll see. So if you choose exit registration and finish later, you'll say that it'll get a message that your registration was successfully saved. You'll get an email that'll have your user ID and a password, and then you can go back into the website, and then you would log in and not register because you already have started an account, and it'll bring you right to where you left off, and you can continue from there. Okay. But if you decide to save and continue, the next thing you want to do is choose the role. And I liken Wide Area Workflow and PIEE to a role-playing game. In order to use it, you have to set a role for yourself. So on this screen, and if you look to the left, there's the outline of each of your steps that you're going to be completing. So you'll know where you are because the pointer is right on step 3. So we're here under step 1, and I don't mean to confuse, Wide Area Workflow is the most common module, so that will automatically be highlighted. Next to that is step 2. Just like we chose a couple of screens ago, we're also going to choose the role of vendor. So once we've chosen that, we'll click Add Roles under step 3. And then step 4 will appear with the role that we've chosen. You'll see I put an arrow next to the location code. That is your CAGE code or your commercial and government entity code. That's that 5-digit alphanumeric number that you get when you register in SAM. So you'll want to provide that location code in that field. It is a mandatory field and you will not be able to advance unless you provide the CAGE code. If you are a new user, you've never used it before, that CAGE code is foreign to the system and you will get an error message that it cannot be activated until a group administrator or a super user has been designated. A lot of times that person could be the e-business point of contact in your SAM profile. And so that means you just are appointed as a super user. Okay. But for completeness sake, we'll walk through the entire registration. I'll tell you what to do if you get stopped at that screen in a moment. But after you've chosen your role, you want to provide justification about why you need access to the system. So that's a justification. Usually we put in some generic statement like you need access to submit a payment request. It's just justification to your administrator or to the system administrator why you need access. Okay, then we'll click next. And then under the summary, this is just basically a recap of all the information you've provided, sort of like a double check to see if everything is correct, your email address, you haven't made any mistakes. If you need to change something, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a previous button, so you can backtrack through all of the screens to get to the information that needs to be changed. Or if everything is good, we can click next. And this is the statement of accountability. So this is where we'll sign it. When we click the signature button, it's going to prompt us for a one-time password. So whatever email address has been designated, the system will send you a one-time password that you can then type in here and submit your registration for activation. Okay. That's an example of the email that you will receive, and it'll tell you what your one-time password is. So that code there is what you would key in order to activate your profile. If all goes well, you'll get a success screen that says you successfully registered. If for some reason you need to purge your information, if you have a duplicate profile, or for whatever, if you want to start all over again, it gives you the opportunity to purge your profile. But keep in mind, once you purge it, it's gone. So it's going to ask you, are you sure you want to do this? And if you say yes, it's been successfully purged, and you'd have to start all over again. Okay. Going back to the first-time users, when you get stopped on the roll screen because your cage code wasn't recognized by the system, what you need to do then is to contact the Wide Area Workflow Help Desk. They will load your cage code in the system, and they will activate your profile. The number for the WAF Help Desk is on this screen. Those options will put you in touch with technical support. So you'll be speaking to a person, and they'll know how to help you fill that out. Just tell them that you're registering. You need to finish your registration. Basically, they'll help you from there. They'll walk you through step by step. Okay. That basically concludes the first module, which is registration. It's pretty straightforward. I usually stop for questions, but I believe I took out those slides, I think. But if you have any questions, you can either type it in the chat or wait till the end. But we're going to go into the next module, which is actually creating and submitting a payment request. PIEE, which Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, and Wide Area Workflow are the DoD preferred methods of invoicing and payment. We don't accept paper invoices anymore, and we don't cut checks. So all of it is done electronically. We also could pay by government purchase card, but we would make that known in your purchase order. If these two clauses appear in your contract, these are Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation clauses. Wide Area Workflow is the payment method. The first one is electronic submissions of payment requests. That's usually just put in by reference, meaning it's just the clause number in the title. The instructions clause below that is actually inserted in your purchase order and put in full text. And it's called a fill-in for a reason, because the contract office will fill in specific instructions to you, the small business, about the type of document that you're going to create when you're generating your payment request, as well as who at the government agency is going to be responsible for processing it. So it gives you specific instructions. If we put the clause in and it's either referenced by title or no specific instructions are given, what I would suggest is to call the contracting office, your contract officer, and they should be able to provide that information to you. This sort of just recaps what I just said, that Wide Area Workflow is the DoD preferred method. It's the portal, the official portal, if you will, for invoicing and payment, and that fax, scanned, or mailed invoices are no longer acceptable. Okay. And again, the Wide Area Workflow Payments Instructions clause will provide you detailed instructions about the type of payment request that you're submitting and who at the government agency is responsible for processing it. It'll also provide a point of contact in case you have any questions as you go through the invoicing process, who to call to get answers to your questions. This is an example of a purchase order form, what we call a DD 1155 form. And the reason why I included it here is because it's still an active form, although the last revised date was 2001. You can see that sometimes it can be misleading. I highlighted a block where it's still instructing companies to mail invoices. So, it does need to be updated, but what we do in this particular case is we just instruct vendors to see the Wide Area Workflow clause in their contract. Underneath that is the payment will be made by block. That is the Defense Finance Accounting Service facility that's responsible for dispersing funds. If this was a credit card transaction, you would see the name of the buyer and the credit card number there. So that would be another tip off as to whether it's a payment through wide area workflow or payment by credit card. If the credit card information is there, then obviously you would run the card. If you see a DFAST payment facility there, then it's usually going to be wide area workflow. When I give my presentations, I usually give them with the caveat that my experience with wide area workflow extends to the types of contracts that we typically do at Tobii Hanna, which includes supply contracts, service contracts, and constructions. But there's a myriad of other contracts and other documents that you could submit. Most of what we do are firm fixed price contracts. But if you were doing cost reimbursement contracts and you were looking to get paid, you would usually typically submit a cost voucher. Now, I don't have much experience with that, but again, the same rules would apply. You would basically provide the mandatory information, and that's the easiest way to submit a payment request. But these are typically the ones that you'll deal with, even if it is another agency. If it's a firm fixed price contract, these are typically the document types that you would be working with. So we've already got our profile and we want to generate or submit our payment request. This time when we go to the website, we're going to choose login. And we're going to go in with our user ID and password, provide that information in the appropriate fields, type in the CAPTCHA image, and then click login. Now you're on what we call the wide area workflow or the PIEE desktop. And based on the role that you chose, for this case, vendor, you'll see you have some icons now under the payment box. You have an icon for wide area workflow or WAF. You also have one for my invoice, and I'll be talking about that in the next module. So to submit a payment request, we're going to click on the wide area workflow icon, and that's going to open a separate screen. If you look in the upper left-hand corner under WAWF, you will have a link to vendor. So in order to generate, and these are all the menu options that are available to you. So if you click on vendor, you'll see you have some choices. The first choice to submit a payment request is to click create document. And this is the next screen that you'll see. I'll call your attention in the upper left-hand corner to your cage code. Normally the cage code will appear here as well as your DUNS number. If nothing appears in that block and it's blank, then that means that your cage code has expired in SAM. So you'll need to contact Dan at the PTAC to get your SAM profile reactivated. As a matter of fact, the system will not let you advance through this screen, and it will not allow you to submit a payment request. And DFAST, Defense Finance Accounting Service, will not wire any payments to accounts that are expired in SAM. So you want to make sure the first check on this screen is make sure that your cage code appears there. The next important piece of information is the contract number. So if you look to the right of your cage code, a couple of fields, you'll see contract number. You want to make sure you type that in. It's a 13-digit number. Make sure you type it in correctly. If you have a GSA contract and you have a task or a delivery order issued against that contract, you'll have a delivery order number or a task order number. So your GSA contract number would go in, or if you have an IDIQ, that contract number would go under contract number, and the specific task order or BPA call or what have you would go under delivery order. Once you provided that information, if you look at the bottom, you have a next button. It'll always appear in the bottom left corner of the screen. And in order to advance to the next screen, we click next. Depending on the type of contract you have, you could have a multitude of CLINs or contract line items. If you have different supplies, cable, wire, whatever, you might have different CLINs or contract line items in there. So you want to make sure that you select the appropriate CLIN that you're charging against. Another example could be if you have a service contract, say for snow shoveling or landscaping, and there are option years or different periods of performance. You want to make sure that you are billing against the correct period of performance, and not one that hasn't been exercised yet. Because if you bill against the wrong CLIN, you run the risk of your payment request getting rejected. Now, you could select any of these, all of these, depending on what you're charging against. If you have a CLIN in your contract and it doesn't appear here, you can still bill against it, okay? And you can actually, I'll show you how to do that in a couple of screens. But if there's a CLIN here, you do have to select a CLIN in order to go to the next screen. If it doesn't appear on this screen, but it appears in your contract, you still want to make a selection, and I'll show you how to change that information later on. But assuming there's no mistakes and you've chosen the appropriate CLINs, go to the bottom of the screen and click Next. You also have the option to click Previous to go back to any screen if you need to do so. Here's where you're going to select the appropriate document. If it's a service contract, you would choose Invoices 2 and 1, which are for services, which we've chosen here. A supply contract could be an invoice and receiving report combo, which is also on this list. If you have a construction contract, it could be a construction payment request, which is also on this list. So you want to make sure you refer to your wide area workflow payments instructions clause to make sure you're choosing the correct document. Once you've found that and you made that selection, go to the bottom of the screen and click Next. This information actually comes from the routing table in WAF. If there's a ship to point, there are certain codes called Department of Defense Activity Address Codes, or DODACs, that are automatically populated here. So most of the time you don't need to agonize over filling out any fields here. This is populated automatically, so we can just advance past this screen. And then you'll find yourself on what we call the header tab. If you look towards the top of the screen, you have folder tabs going across your screen. The header tab is the one we're currently on. That's the one highlighted in blue. And you see I've highlighted for a service invoice some of the mandatory fields here. So you'll obviously have to provide an invoice number. Wide area workflow does not generate one, so that is your invoice number. If you don't have one, you can make one up. The invoice date next to that is system generated, and it's usually today's date, so we don't change that normally. And then obviously, if it's not the final invoice, if it's a partial payment request, we can toggle that final invoice between yes and no. Just a note here that if you do have a contract with option years, your final invoice would not be the final invoice for your option year. It would be actually at the end of the total period of performance for your contract. So if you know option years are going to be exercised, final invoice will always be no until you get to the absolute last invoice for your contract. Okay. If you were doing an invoice and receiving report combo for a supply, this would be the header tab that you would see. Okay. The shipment number would now be a mandatory field, which I've highlighted. The shipment date would also be required. That's the date you shipped it. And then also the designator for final shipment. Whether it's a partial shipment, it would be no. If it is the last shipment, it would be yes. One thing I typically tell companies, though, is to ship first and bill later, or bill second. Make sure that the agency has a chance to receive and receipt your shipment before you submit it in WAF. I know we've had situations at Toby Hanna where if we don't find that we've received the items, we might put that on the back burner, and your payment request might sit there. So you want to make sure that the shipping point, the receiving office, has the supplies and they've received it, and then you could submit your invoice. And that way, there aren't any unnecessary waits, or someone doesn't forget about it, lack of a better word. Once we've filled out the header tab, you'll see that the next screen we want to go to is the line item tab. Let me back up a second here. If you look at the top of the screen here, there's an error message that says there are errors in the following tab, line item. So it's calling your attention that there is some information in the line item tab that must be provided before you can submit the invoice. So we'll click on the line item tab, and whatever contract line items we selected will appear here on this screen under line item details. As I mentioned before, if the line item does not appear in your in wide area workflow, but it is authorized in your contract, if you look under actions, you have an option to add. So you can click add and add all that line item data if it's a line item that's authorized but didn't appear in wide area workflow. For this example, though, we chose line item 2. So it appears here and it says that it's invalid. So it's again, we have an error. We have to provide some information. So how we're going to access the line item data is to click Edit under Actions. What it's requiring here is actually a quantity shipped and a unit price. If it's a partial payment request, you can change the quantity to whatever you want. It will adjust the unit price. For a service contract, our unit of measure is always 1. The unit of measure could be a lot, or it could be a job. If it's a partial payment request, you can also edit the unit price. So typically, the line item, the unit price is the fully funded amount. It could be the full amount of your contract. So you want to pay close attention to the unit price. Make sure that it reflects the amount that you're invoicing for. The description block that I've highlighted here is you can tell us what you're billing us for. If it's a service contract with monthly installments, you can tell us what month you're billing us for. For some service contracts, we get an inherent error, and I don't know why. But for some reason, even under a service contract, it's expecting a national stock number, and it gives you an error for that value that's loaded in there. What you can do is change the value in the product service ID. That's where the national stock number would normally be put in if it was a supply contract. But here we could change that. That is a text field, and you can change that value. And then the field to the right of that is the product service ID qualifier, which is a drop down. And in this case, you can choose services rendered. And once you've done that, and if you review it and your unit price is correct, you can save your line item data by clicking Save CLIN/SLIN in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. If we filled out all the information, the mandatory information, the system will allow us to go back to this screen. And now you'll see there's no more errors. So once we've done that, all the errors are gone. We know we've done it correctly. In some supply contracts, the shipping charges are authorized. Of course, you need a clause in your contract, FOB origin, that authorizes the shipping charge. And I have seen some contracts where the shipping charge is actually a line item in the contract, but normally we have to add that as an additional charge. And the way we would add a shipping charge would be under the miscellaneous amounts tab, which I've highlighted here with the arrow. So if we click on miscellaneous amounts, you'll see there's a miscellaneous fee. And just like adding line item data, we can add the shipping charge by clicking add. And then under miscellaneous fee, there's a drop down. Transportation direct billing charge is in fact the only choice you have. So that's the only choice you'll be allowed to put in there. The description likewise will automatically fill in. You can provide the amount of your shipping charge under the miscellaneous fee price. One key here that I tell companies is that for any shipping charge under $100, you don't have to provide a copy of the shipping bill. So let me rephrase that. Any shipping charge over $100 has to be substantiated by attaching a copy of the shipping bill. It can't be a rate quote. It has to be a copy of the shipping bill. As a matter of fact, Defense Finance Accounting Service, or DFAS, will not pay the shipping charge or any charges over $100 without a copy of that bill. So once you put in your charges, we click Save Miscellaneous Fee. Okay. And of course, the fee shows up here. Okay. If we do have a charge over $100 and we have to attach, or if you want to attach any supporting documentation to substantiate your invoice, you can do it under the Attachments tab, which is next to the miscellaneous amount. So if you click on Attachments, it'll allow you to choose the file from your computer and upload it. So if you click on that, it'll allow you to upload it. One key here, though, is that for your file names, and you can upload a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, or a PDF, but the file name must only contain letters and numbers, no spaces or special characters. So WAF is picky about the file names that you choose. Just make sure it's only letters and numbers. If you've mistakenly added or designated an invoice as a final invoice, but it wasn't meant to be the final, you'll get an error message that a final, if for any subsequent invoice, you will get an error message that a final invoice already exists. The system will allow you to submit invoices after you've designated one as final. You just have to provide a comment or a reason why that this one's the final or the previous one wasn't. And the way you would do that would be going through the comments box. So if you click on the comments tab, it'll bring you to the comments box. Comments could be required for other conditions as well. But here you can type in the comment. If it was a final, after a final as we call it, you could just say that you're resubmitting the invoice and it'll allow you to submit it. Comments are also required when an invoice is being rejected. So when we receive at the government a copy of your invoice and we review it and we find there may be an error, we do have the option to reject it back to you, but we have to tell you why we're rejecting it. So that's one thing we definitely do. It's required. We can't just reject it back to you without some reason why or some comment why it's being rejected. And we want to tell you why it's rejected, obviously, so you know what to fix when you're going to resubmit it. Comments could also be required on supply contracts, UID, unique item identification. When you have a unit price over $5,000, there will be a condition set in the receiving report where you do have to provide barcode or UID information. Or if you're submitting a final after a final. I know at Tobii Handle we don't require UID in our contracts, and there is a clause that will tell us that those line items are exempt from UID information. But Wide Area Workflow doesn't know that. So what you want to do is tell Wide Area Workflow through the comments box that UID is not required in your contract. As you recall, when we go to submit our invoices after we've reviewed everything, we've made some changes like a unit price, or we may have changed that value for service contracts. Whatever values have changed that might be different from the contract, when we go to submit that invoice, we're going to get what's called a validation warning message, just calling our attention to the data that's been changed. It's not an error, so don't get excited. It's just a warning message, just to tell us that we've changed some values that are different from our contract. So the most important information is obviously the price. So if the amount of the invoice is correct, and that's what I tell small businesses all the time, as long as your quantities and your unit prices are correct, regardless of any other flags that it gives you, it's usually okay, and you can click all right or okay to submit your invoice.